Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mex Moves, a weekly podcast where we try to decode Mexico's investment community and businesses here and abroad for a U.S. audience or a Mexican audience interested in an English language podcast. Hi, Damien.
Hi, Eduardo. How are you?
I'm doing great. Today, I think we have a very interesting show. We're going to review a few key figures, Mexicans who live abroad and who have made it in the United States with their business or their leadership in executive roles in America.
Sounds great. Who do you have in mind? Which Mexicans, in your view at least, have made it in the U.S.?
Let me start with Pablo Legorreta. I don't know how much you know about him, but he's a very interesting businessman without a doubt, as he is the CEO and founder of a company called Royalty Pharma, which has, I would say, probably is the leader by far in the field of funding medical innovative therapies by acquiring either royalties that are already generating revenue from previous therapeutical products that are in the market, or by going to researchers, academic institutions, hospitals, and help them fund processes that will develop in cures or procedures or medicines or treatments that will help people improve their lives or combat diseases, problems that they have in their health. You've heard of Royalty Pharma?
Yeah, I've actually met Pablo a few times over the years. What's impressive about Pablo from the outside is that he, first of all, this is a completely self-made company. It wasn't a company, it was a greenfield company. It was founded by him back, I think, in 1996 and wasn't inherited. It wasn't a company he bought with capital from third parties. It's a company that he developed into what it is today. And then the other interesting thing about Pablo is how he has been so active philanthropically in funding hospitals, drug treatment, universities, and other worthy causes. A real model to follow. I'm familiar with at least, I think they own part of the royalty of Tysabri, which is a multiple sclerosis drug, a blockbuster, Biogen. I think they also have a migraine
They
drug.
have a few.
The royalty, the one that Lady Gaga, I hear, takes, which is quite Nurtec, which also has been very effective. And as you say, what they've done very well is identify patents that need funding or that are already generating revenues, but the original owner or the majority owner has too much risk concentrated and wants to receive upfront payment in return for giving away some of the future revenues and therefore diversifying their risk. That's particularly important, I think, for universities, the medical departments that might have a blockbuster in their hands, but they're so dependent on that blockbuster to fund buildings or scholarships, grants, research, that it makes sense to diversify a bit, sell off some of that future royalties and receive some cash.
Let's talk a little bit about where does Pablo come. How did he came up with this idea of Royalty Pharma? Because it didn't come out of the blue. Pablo is currently, I suppose, 60 years old, and he holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from the Ibero University. But then he did an MBA at Columbia Business School. And before this company that he developed in his mind and created and has executed tremendously well, we'll talk about some of the numbers of how large this company is in a bit. He worked as an investment banker at Lazard Frères in Paris and New York, dealing precisely with financial needs for the pharmaceutical companies that he attended as an investment banker. And that's where I think he came up with the idea, if I'm not corrected, or where he saw the needs of these new therapies that required a lot of capital to make it to the market. As we all know, to develop a new drug, to develop a new treatment requires tremendous research, tremendous investment, and tremendous time sometimes to go through the regulatory process of being approved after being tested in labs and in some cases in humans. So that time frame from the conceptual idea of a new drug or a new treatment to the time it goes to the market could be heavily burdensome on those that are trying to develop these new drugs, and the need for capital is very much needed. And that's where I think Pablo came up with this brilliant engineering financial idea of telling people, well, why don't I join with you and I can fund your development while it goes through the different processes, and I will get a portion or total royalties of the drug that you develop. And so he kind of like unloads the risks from those that are developing the products and then takes the rewards if they happen, because there is always risk involved in these developments. And that's how I think from Lassard he jumped to this idea and created Royalty Pharma, which, as you said, Damien, has been engaged in a lot of products that are now very successful in helping people cure all sorts of diseases, from preventing or helping cancer treatments being less invasive on the patient, to also kidney treatments, helping those that are facing kidney failure, to help them to prolong the life of the kidney. His company is not that large. He has only 86 workers, but these are top-notch either investors or science people that can take a close look to these developments that are taking place, do a very thorough due diligence to make the decision to invest or not in the products that are coming up. His company is based in New York City, and he has, just to let you know, he has displaced over the past almost 2 decades $20 billion in funding or more for these products. And so he obviously takes the risk. He obviously raises the capital, gives it out, and then obtains the rewards that are much higher than what he pays on the interest or on the payments that he has to do whoever lends him the money. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I was looking at the stock price. They IPO'd back in 2020 at $28. It had a huge pop on the first day. I think it went up to $44 on the first day. It was a really successful IPO. And then it's been a bit disappointing, actually. Stock is now at about $32. So if you bought after the initial pop, you lost money. I think some of the growth expectations that were built into the IPO weren't quite met. I think at the time, the corporate governance wasn't considered ideal, or at least right after the IPO, with an external manager owned by Pablo and his team receiving significant financial benefit for running the Royalty Pharma company. And just a month ago, or earlier this year, they internalized the management.
Right.
They paid $1 billion, I think about a bit over $1 billion, to the investment fund that was managing the company. And the company will now keep the royalties in the stock. Reacted positively to that. So I think the corporate governance issues, rather like the REITs, have been sorted out now, and hopefully will continue to do well going forward. One of the other interesting things is that Pablo Agresta is actually, as you may know, the brother-in-law of another influential Mexican businessman in the United States. Although I don't think he meets our criteria precisely, because he lives, as far as I know, in Mexico, which is Alfonso de Angoitia. Alfonso de Angoitia, as we all know, is the co-CEO of Grupo Televisa and also of Televisa Univision. And some argue that Angoitia and Bernardo Gomez and Emilio Escarra, of course, were the three most influential Hispanics in the U.S. election by switching or pivoting Univision coverage to being historically, under Jorge Ramos, quite pro-Democrats, to being either neutral or pro-Trump, depending on your point of view, with that interview at the end of 2023 with Enrique Acevedo and Trump, which was considered a sort of softball interview at the time. And Leo Krause was either resigned or was fired for writing a column criticizing that interview. And then in recognition of that and the general sort of news coverage of Univision, which is the primary source of news for Spanish-speaking Hispanics in the U.S., of course, Trump invited Angoitia and Gomez to a meeting in Mar-a-Lago. And then they got sort of top table at Trump's inauguration and have a very close relationship with Jared Kushner, the Trump's son-in-law. So those are two other Mexican businessmen very influential in the U.S., although they live here in Mexico, so arguably don't count for your list.
Well, but it's important to highlight that they are influential in the States like Pablo is. Just to get back a little bit on Pablo, he's worth on his own, according to Forbes list, about $4.2 billion, which was probably even larger when you were talking at the beginning of the IPO, as it was at a larger valuation than it is today. But that showed us how he has an enormous amount of wealth thanks to his own creation of this company and finding a way to finance the development of new drugs. Let me just give a few examples of the Royalty Pharma is getting on from different products. I'm just going to mention a few. There is a drug called Trikafta, which helps those that are suffering from cystic fibrosis. That's a drug that Royalty Pharma developed with Vertex. Another one is Trelegy, helps those patients with asthma. That was developed with GFK. Then we have Evrysdi, spinal muscular atrophy. That's a drug that helps with that disease. That was developed alongside with Roche. We have also Tremfya. That was developed with Johnson & Johnson's for psoriatic arthritis. And then the one that you mentioned, Tysabri with Biogen. That's something that helps with multiple sclerosis, and so on and so forth. Let me just also mention about some of the donations that you mentioned. Pablo and his wife, Almudena, have donated $25 million to a center in the Massachusetts General Hospital, now called the Legorreta Center for Clinical Transplant Tolerance. They are developing a tremendous therapy that will change the lives of those who receive a kidney transplant. At this center, alongside with Royalty Pharma, what they're doing is they're trying to train your bone marrow to accept, with the cells of the donor's bone marrow, to accept another tissue on your organism, so that you won't have to have any more to take immunosuppressives for the rest of your life. As we know, these immunosuppressives can have second side effects on the body of those that are transplanted. So the development that Pablo is helping will probably avoid the need to take immunosuppressives for those that are transplanted, let's say a kidney transplant or maybe a liver transplant or a lung transplant later on in life. That's still in trial, but it is a tremendous impact in the world of kidney. And lastly, they're also developing genetically modified pigs so that the pig kidney is accepted by the human body. If that comes to fruition, it will probably help with the shortages of kidneys that are out there for those people that have kidney failure. And that's another area where Pablo is doing. And also he has participated in $5 million donation to the Brigham and Women's Hospital in New England, also for kidney transplant, while he is also a supporter of a foundation in Latin America that helps with health problems in the region. A very interesting profile, without a doubt.
Yeah, and for those who want to know more, there's quite a few YouTube videos out there. One, Pablo talks about his son being one of the first recipients in a kidney transplant of the immune suppressant technology that they've been developing. It's a very moving video.
It's a very impressive thing that he's in his own family. He's so confident in what he's trying to do and accomplish that he has helped his son overcome this problem. It's very impressive.
So why don't we switch to another huge success story from a different part of Mexico, Daniel Lubetzky, who made a fortune selling Kind bars to Mars. He ended up selling the business for about $5 billion. He was born in Mexico City to Jewish immigrants. His father was a Holocaust survivor. That played a very important role in his business career and obviously in his formation. He moved to Texas as he was finishing school, ended up at Stanford with a law degree, and marked a lot by the Holocaust. He moved to Israel and founded a business that was really called Peaceworks. It was focused on bringing together Israeli and Arab populations in that part of the world through trading and through food products. That wasn't a commercial success, but it certainly taught him how to build a successful food business, which he then did back in 2004, founding Kind and the Kind bars. And what it's called Kind because most of you have probably had them. They are organic, they're healthy, they're not processed, and so you're being kind to your body by eating them and not eating ultra processed food. But it's also has a deeper meaning. He's given a lot of TED Talks. He's been on Shark Tank. He's written a book, and his whole business philosophy is based around being kind, being empathetic, being socially responsive to the problems in the world. And in a way, reading his book and a bit about him, he is the sort of anti-Trump businessman.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
He talks very much about avoiding extremism, avoiding angry and divisive rhetoric, and trying to bring people together. In fact, he divides the world into destroyers who use divisive language, sounds familiar, and actions to demolish unity, and builders who actively unite, create, and bring light to the world. And one of his concerns is that people who are builders tend to be more passive, as he said, more focused on making sure that everyone has breakfast, whereas the destroyers, especially on social media, tend to be more active and aggressive, so they get much more of the limelight. So he really wants the builders and the empathetic people to be more proactive and to take more of a role in society. I don't know him, but he has his 4 C's, which is curiosity, willing to learn, which certainly he's shown in his life, compassion, empathy with different views, creativity, innovative solutions to complex problems, and courage, stand up against divisive narratives with conviction. And he certainly put that into place. He's now, though he's still involved in Kind bars, he set up a company called Somos, which is to sell Mexican food into the United States, but high quality, traditionally sourced. And that's obviously well capitalized with someone with tremendous experience and relationships and know-how. So that will not only allow Americans to taste quality Mexican food, not the Tex-Mex stuff that many are familiar with, but also have a knock-on effect in Mexican communities that are producing that food. So he's one of the most successful businessmen in the United States because he was able to sell Kind bars, owning the vast majority of the company because it was basically profitable from the very beginning. So he barely needed outside equity to keep it going.
Is he related to the filmmaker or the
Emmanuel?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're first cousins. In fact, if you look at him on social media, he when his cousin won the Oscar for cinematography, he gave him a good shout out. So very talented family.
And that's what I was going to say. A very impressive family. And again, another great inspirational story, if I might say so, in these times of very distressful news and apocalyptic discourse sometimes.
Indeed. Do you want to switch to our last one for today? Andrei Zarur from Greenlight Biosciences.
Let's do so. Andrei Zarur is another very inspirational character, I gotta say. I haven't met him, I don't know him, but I've been researching about his endeavors, his penetration of the business world. He studied chemical engineer at the UNAM.
Like Mexico's president.
Yep, but he's a bit younger. He's only 54 years old. And then he went on to do a master's degree and a PhD in chemical engineering, but none other than from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the top science schools in the United States. Obviously, from a very young age, he was curious in developing things, in creating companies. So in 2002, he founded his first company that was called Bioprocessors. That company focused on developing innovative solutions in the biotechnology field, mainly to cure, again, diseases in people like Royalty Pharma has done, supporting others that do this. He held that company until he joined Kodiak Venture Partners, private equity firm, in 2006. And he sold it when he sold the bioprocessor company to a company called Seahorse Bioscience that year. Seahorse then later was acquired by Agilent, a big pharma company. So in Kodiak, he was a managing partner, and that's when he was very much involved in financing, especially biotechnology or life technology companies. As he was a member of that team, he founded first Lumicell, where he is still the executive chairman, and is a company that is dedicated to advancing technologies for early cancer detection and patient monitoring. Lumicell has about 50 workers. It's based in Newton, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston, and it focuses mainly on developing, this is super interesting, fluorescence-guided technologies for cancer surgery. So the technology helps surgeons detect and remove residual cancerous tissue during surgery, improving the surgical outcome. This technology is called Lumicent Direct Visualization System, which uses an optical imaging agent and handheld devices to detect cancer cells during surgery. Then, that same year, he founded Greenlight Biosciences. He founded Biosciences in 2013, and he has been the chairman until 2020. And he has developed techniques and therapies to combat Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So he, again, is one of those people that has put in his great knowledge and capacity for the good of humanity, if I may say so. And at Greenlight, they have also developed RNA-based solutions for humans and animals and plant health applications. Greenlight is headquartered in Medford, Massachusetts, and has raised about $200 million in investment, and is now working to develop a more accessible COVID-19 vaccine, as well as sustainable agricultural solutions through all these technologies about fluorescence and looking at the genetic elements of plants. The company has about 210 employees, and it helps develop management, plant protection, and pandemic preparedness. They have developed products like Calantha, an RNA-based solution for controlling the Colorado potato beetle. The company is publicly traded now and is worth about $45.2 million.
I was seeing, Eduardo, that a bit like some of the other stories we just heard, Andre was also influenced by his son, Alex, who developed some neurological issues that were triggered by pesticide and preservatives in food. And he had helped inspire him to develop this RNA technology that helps suppress the gene in the food, in the pest of the food, in a much more environmental friendly way than chemical pesticides.
That's super interesting. So again, life experiences help these great minds to accomplish more than they probably, well, I don't know if they had anticipated, but it should have definitely inspired them to put in their knowledge for the good of, in this case, their own siblings or sons for the benefit of humanity.
That's right. And they just, in December, a couple of months ago, Greenlight just opened up in Mexico, Greenlight Biosciences Mexico. And their goal is to introduce next generation crop protection to Mexican farmers that don't rely on these chemical pesticides that could be quite damaging. And I would imagine, although I don't know, that President Sheinbaum would be very supportive of this.
I was going to mention that. I mean, with this debate about genetically modified corn, he probably is on Sheinbaum's side in that sense of trying to avoid humans to take genetically modified foods. I guess that debate is up in the air, but people of this caliber could have a lot to say in what the repercussions might be for us human in taking such type of foods or processed food and things like that.
Yeah, although they are genetically modifying, but in an environmental friendly way. So
yeah, exactly.
You could imagine purists would not be supportive of this. People like me, at least, would be very supportive if we can have cleaner agricultural products that don't rely on toxic chemicals.
It's combating exactly that. I think how could you oppose?
But maybe the vaccine deniers, which is also developed with a sort of parallel technology, would be concerned.
Interesting that we're listening to people that are in favor of vaccines, in favor of treatments, in favor of not divisive, destructive, destroyers world, in a world where we're seeing a very polarized element on all these issues and more.
That's right. So why don't we leave it at that on the, if you agree, Mexican entrepreneurs and businessmen have done well in the United States and live in the United States. There are other people that come to mind that we can come back to in a future podcast.
Let's do that.
Eduardo, I wanted to go back to an issue we talked about, I think, in our first podcast, which is the spin-off of Banamex from Citigroup in Mexico. And the two banks are now fully spun off. And in December, they reported their numbers to the CNBV, the regulator here. So now we get a sense of what Banamex is going to be, and in fact is, and how it will be when it's IPO'd in the stock market, which is the current plan, although you can't rule out someone coming up and trying to buy it. So before the split, according to the CNBV data, Citibanamex was the fourth largest bank by loans and the third largest bank in Mexico by deposits. Post the split, so basically the large company credit portfolio stayed with Citi, and everything else, for the most part, stayed with Banamex. Banamex now goes down to sixth largest bank in the loan portfolio. And it's interesting because before Citi bought Banamex, Banamex was the number one. So they've gone effectively, from one to sixth. And Citi Mexico, which is this large company corporate loan bank for the most part, will now be the ninth largest bank. And again, looking at some of the numbers, you could see how Citi-Banamex, the combined entity, and therefore Citi and Banamex are two separate entities, how they've lost a lot of market share in loans and deposits and pretty much in pretty much every
in all
area.
categories.
The only area where they excelling in is in high operating expenses. They have, relative to revenues, they're much less efficient than other banks of a comparable size. But that all suggests that there's upside should new management be able to tackle their cost structure and arrest the decline in market share. But we'll be following that, because if it happens at the end of this year, as the current plan is, it will be one of the most high-profile IPOs in Mexico for a very long time. And talking about successful Mexicans in the United States, the former CEO of Citibanamex, Ernesto Torres Cantú, is based now in New York. He's the head of international at Citi, a job he's had since September 2023, and so he's on the various kind of management boards of Citi globally. So although he's not an entrepreneur, he is, without any question, one of maybe the most senior Mexican in Wall Street in New York that I'm aware of at this juncture.
I think so too. I can't think of anyone else in a U.S.-based bank with such a high-profile job right now.
And just to wrap up on tariffs and Mexico, which seems to be a never-ending saga, Trump has now said that he's going to put the same tariffs on exports to the United States that country puts on U.S. exports to it. So it's a tit-for-tat tariff strategy. Now that would be great for Mexico.
That's my guess, because we have no tariffs on their exports.
Whereas Brazil does, Argentina does,
exactly.
India does. So
most other countries do.
Yeah. So we are. If it's a complicating factor, is that based on what Trump has said in his Truth Social post, they're going to consider VAT as
that was the question that has created some upheaval, though.
Yeah, because the US, of course, doesn't have VAT per se; they have sales tax, and for VAT, you can, if you're a Mexican producer, you can deduct from the VAT most of your input costs.
Correct.
So you don't, in effect, pay the full
VAT tax. Yeah.
Whereas if you're an exporter, that's more difficult to do because you don't have costs in Mexico. So he is arguing that VAT gives an unfair advantage. Now, there's plenty of ways of mitigating VAT. On the face of it, it's less bad for Mexico than anyone else, but it doesn't mean that Mexico's out of the woods. And then after announcing that, he then said that they would put a 25% tariff on cars and pharmaceutical products.
Yeah.
And the Wall Street Journal, in a note this morning or last night, sort of said somewhat far down in the note, it's unclear whether this applies to Mexico or not.
It's unclear what everything he's saying right now.
But what is clear, and the CCE, the Mexican Business Body Council, said that as much as $60 billion of investment is on hold because of concerns about tariffs, and also the plan to see constitutional changes that Sheinbaum has now put into Mexico's constitution. And that's holding back investment because people don't know what's happening. And while they don't know what's going to happen, they're going to wait before they put billions of dollars into a new plant.
Correct.
So that's going to cool down the Mexican economy. And economists at the beginning of the year were looking at growth of 1%, and maybe it's going to be even lower than that. And the flip side of that is the central bank is cutting rates reasonably aggressively, given how far the economy is cooling. And you're beginning to see that in some of the fourth quarter results, roughly half of which have been reported at this point. And a lot of companies are reporting, slightly weak numbers, like Walmart Mexico, which is another company we talked about in the previous podcast, had slightly soft sales. They're the biggest retailer here, of course. So the economy was already weakening into the fourth quarter, and I can't imagine the first quarter is going to be a lot better.
And you said it in a previous podcast, Damien, that just the threat of the tariffs is impacting, like Mexican Business Council is saying, on future investment, as long as that is not cleared out. And maybe Trump has this tactic of prolonging. I mean, the dates have already been postponed, but you don't know if it's going to take place. So we had February 1st, then we have March 1st, now we have April as well. That's when the executive order to review all the trade treaties and tariffs situations with all U.S. trading nations. So this is a big cloud hanging on the Mexican economy that doesn't seem to be clearing out in the near term. And that, if we are already seeing a slowing down economy, will probably be prolonged further, and it will take a little bit longer for Mexico to come out of the woods. You are all saying in some of the indicators that the economy is slowing. You're also seeing in the portion of foreign capital invested in the stock market and in government bonds coming down as it has in the past. So the outlook is not that promising at the current moment, I would say.
True, but at the beginning of the Trump first administration, things also looked pretty
Clean.
dicey, and,
Yeah.
and Mexico, in the end, turned out to be a winner from the sort of relocation of trade. So we'll see. I think that is the end for this week, Eduardo. Thank you, everyone, for joining Mex Moves. We encourage you to subscribe to Mex Moves on Spotify or Apple Music and listen to next week's episode.
And don't forget to click the bell so that you can receive a message when our new podcast is out. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.